My dad pushed my 9-year-old daughter at the Christmas table. That seat is for my real grandkid. Get out. She hit the floor in front of the whole family, but everyone stayed silent. I didn't cry. I said 4 words. Check your bank account. My mom dropped her wineglass. My dad went pale, and in that crystalline moment, inside their $15 million Summerlin mansion, with its cathedral ceilings and that ridiculous Swarovski chandelier throwing rainbow light across my daughter Mira's tear-streaked face, I watched my entire family freeze, like someone had pressed pause on their perfect little movie. My sister Vanessa's fork clattered onto her Versace china. My brother Derek's wife Lauren grabbed his arm so hard her acrylic nails left marks. Even the catering staff, in their crisp black uniforms, stopped mid-pour, expensive Bordeaux hovering over crystal glasses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But I wasn't looking at any of them. I was looking at my father, Richard Castellano, real estate mogul and self-appointed king of Las Vegas luxury development, watching the color drain from his artificially tanned face as his phone started buzzing in his pocket. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound cut through the silence like a scalpel. "What did you do?" My mother's voice came out strangled, her Botoxed forehead somehow managing to crease despite thousands of dollars worth of preventative measures. Patricia Castellano, former Miss Nevada 1982, current socialite and charity gala organizer, looked like someone had just told her Neiman Marcus was closing permanently. She grabbed the edge of the table, her 4-carat diamond ring catching the light, and I almost laughed at how perfectly it captured everything about this family, all sparkle and no substance, beautiful on the surface and hollow underneath. "Mommy?" Mira's voice was so small, so broken, and that was what nearly made me lose it. Not the shove, not the words, not even the way my father had looked at her like she was trash he'd found stuck to his Italian leather shoes. It was hearing my brilliant, sweet, talented daughter sound so utterly defeated that made something inside me crystallize into pure, cold rage. I moved to her, helped her up from the travertine tile, brushed off her red velvet dress, the one we'd spent 3 hours shopping for because she wanted to look pretty for Christmas dinner with her grandparents, because despite everything I'd tried to shield her from, she still believed family meant something. "We're leaving," I said quietly, my hand on Mira's shoulder. She was trembling, and I could feel every shake like an earthquake in my chest. "But before we do, Dad, you should really check your phone. That buzzing? That's Wells Fargo, Chase, and Bank of America all trying to reach you simultaneously. Funny how that happens when someone initiates multiple wire transfers totaling $8.3 million. The room exploded. Everyone started talking at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of confusion and accusation. But I just kept my eyes on my father, watching him fumble for his phone, watching his face go from pale to gray to almost green as he scrolled through what I knew were automated alerts telling him that various accounts he thought were safely hidden behind shell corporations and trusts, had just been systematically drained. "That's impossible," he whispered, but his hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped his phone. "Those accounts, you don't even know about those accounts. Nobody knows about those accounts." "Stephanie knew," I said simply. "Your accountant, the one you've been sleeping with for the past 6 years, the one who handles all your offshore investments and cryptocurrency portfolios. Yeah, she knew everything. And 3 months ago, when you fired her because she threatened to tell Mom about your little arrangement, she got really chatty over a very expensive lunch at Joël Robuchon. Funny how loyal people get when they're angry. My mother made a sound like a wounded animal, but I still didn't look away from my father. This moment had been 15 years in the making, ever since he'd sat me down in his study with a tumbler of Macallan and explained very calmly why I needed to give Mira up for adoption. She was illegitimate, he'd said. Bad for the family image, bad for business, a mistake that needed to be corrected. When I refused, when I chose my daughter over his approval, he'd cut me off completely. No trust fund, no job in the family business, no support of any kind. I'd been 23 years old, fresh out of UNLV with a degree in business administration and a newborn baby, and he'd made sure every door in Las Vegas was closed to me. Every contact, every opportunity, every connection I might have had. Gone. Because Richard Castellano had decided his youngest daughter was dead to him. "You stole from me," my father said, his voice rising, that familiar rage starting to color his features. This was the face I remembered from childhood, the one that came out when things didn't go his way, when someone dared to challenge his authority. "That's theft, Angelina. That's a crime. I'll have you arrested. I'll have you—" "You'll have me what?" I interrupted, and my voice was so calm it surprised even me. "Prosecuted? Really? With what evidence? The accounts that don't officially exist? The ones you've been using to hide income from the IRS for over a decade? The same accounts you funded through inflating construction costs on federal projects and skimming money from the Castellano Foundation? You know, the charity Mom runs, the one that's supposed to help underprivileged children but somehow never seems to have enough money to actually help anyone?" I pulled out my phone, held it up. "Because I have copies of everything, Dad. Every transaction, every falsified invoice, every fraudulent tax return, and they're currently sitting in a safe deposit box with instructions to be delivered to the FBI, the IRS, and the Nevada Gaming Control Board if anything happens to me or my daughter. So please, call the police. I'll wait." The silence that followed was deafening. My brother Derek finally found his voice, standing up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. "Are you insane? You're destroying this family. Everything Dad built, everything we have." "Everything he stole," I corrected. "Let's be accurate here, Derek. And before you get too righteous, maybe you should worry about your own situation. How's that DUI from last month working out? The one where you hit a parked car on the strip and Dad paid $50,000 to make disappear? Or should we talk about the prescription drug problem you've been hiding from Lauren? Because I have the pharmacy records from that shady place in Henderson, the one where you've been doctor shopping for Oxy?" Lauren's face went white. "Derek?" "You're bluffing," my sister Vanessa said, but her voice wavered. She'd always been the smart one, the calculated one, Dad's favorite because she was just like him, ruthless and ambitious, and willing to do whatever it took to win. "You're making this up. You don't have—" "I have everything," I said softly. "Did you really think I spent the last 15 years just struggling to survive? Just working 3 jobs to put myself through business school while raising Mira alone? I've been watching, Vanessa, learning, building my own network. And the beautiful thing about being invisible, about being the family embarrassment nobody talks to or acknowledges, is that people forget you exist. They get careless. They talk freely in restaurants and at charity galas because they think you're not important enough to matter. But I was always there, always listening, always documenting." I finally looked at my mother, who was crying now, mascara running down her face in black rivulets. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her. Part of me remembered being 7 years old and having her brush my hair before bed, singing softly, making me feel like the most precious thing in the world. But that woman was gone, if she'd ever really existed at all. This Patricia, the one who'd sat silent year after year while my father systematically destroyed me, who'd crossed the street when she saw me and Mira at the farmer's market, who'd told everyone at her country club that she only had 2 children, she deserved every tear. "This is about a chair," my mother said weakly, "about one incident. This is about 15 years, I said. my voice finally starting to shake with the emotion I'd been holding back. 15 years of you people pretending Mira doesn't exist? 15 years of walking past your developments and seeing the Castellano name in gold letters and remembering that I helped design 3 of those buildings when I was still in school, that I gave Dad the idea for the mixed-use concept that made him another $40 million, and I never got a penny or even a thank you. 15 years of watching Mira ask why she doesn't have grandparents like the other kids, why her cousins don't know her name, why we never get invited to Christmas or Thanksgiving or birthdays. And tonight, when I finally got weak, when I finally let her convince me that maybe things could be different, that maybe we could try one more time, he pushed my baby. He put his hands on my 9-year-old daughter and threw her to the ground like garbage in front of everyone, and every single one of you sat there and said nothing. My voice broke on the last word, and Mira squeezed my hand. When I looked down at her, she was looking up at me with something I'd never seen before. Not sadness or confusion or hurt, but pride. My little girl was proud of me, and in that moment, I knew I'd done the right thing. Whatever came next, whatever consequences followed, at least she would know her mother had fought for her. "The money's already gone," I continued, forcing my voice steady again, "distributed to various accounts Stephanie helped me set up. Some of it's going to actually fund the scholarships that the Castellano Foundation was supposed to provide. Some of it's going to the women's shelter on Maryland Parkway that's been struggling to stay open. And some of it's going into a trust for Mira's education. A trust you can't touch, can't contest, can't do anything about, because legally that money never existed in the first place." I smiled, and I knew it wasn't a nice smile. "You taught me that, Dad. How to hide money, how to move it around, how to make it disappear and reappear exactly where you want it. I learned from the best." "I'll fight this," my father said, but he sounded defeated, old. For the first time, I saw him not as the terrifying figure from my childhood, but as what he really was. A bully who'd finally met someone who wouldn't back down. "I'll get lawyers. You'll do nothing," I said flatly. "Because if you do anything at all to come after me or Mira, if you even speak our names in public, those files go public too. And then you won't just lose money, Dad. You'll lose everything. Your reputation, your business, your freedom. The Castellano name will be synonymous with fraud and corruption. Is that really worth it? Is your pride worth destroying everything you actually care about?" I didn't wait for an answer. I took Mira's hand and turned toward the door, walking past the catering staff, past the ridiculous Christmas tree that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, past the family photos on the wall that carefully excluded any evidence I existed. But before we reached the foyer, I heard my mother's voice, broken and desperate. "Angelina, please, we can talk about this. We can—" "There's nothing to talk about," I said without turning around. "You made your choice 15 years ago, Mom. Every single day you made it again. You chose his money over your daughter, his reputation over your granddaughter, and now you get to live with that choice. Merry Christmas." We walked out into the desert night, and the air was cold and clean after the suffocating atmosphere inside. Mira was quiet until we got to my car, a 7-year-old Honda Civic that had seen better days, parked between a Bentley and a Porsche like a mongrel at a dog show. Then she turned to me, her dark eyes serious. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" "No, baby," I said, kneeling down so I could look at her properly. "We're not in trouble, but things are going to be different now. Is that okay?" She thought about it, then nodded. "Different good or different bad?" "Different scary," I admitted, "but different honest, and I think honest is better, don't you?" She hugged me then, fierce and tight, and I held her and stared back at that massive house with all its lights and luxury and lies.
I'd burned my bridges tonight, every single one. There would be consequences I couldn't predict, ripples I couldn't control. But I'd also done something I should have done 15 years ago. I'd chosen my daughter over everything else. And whatever came next, at least I could look her in the eye and know I'd fought for her. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known as we drove away from Summerlin, heading back to our small apartment in Henderson, was that my father had made 3 phone calls before we even reached the highway, that my sister Vanessa was already planning her own countermove, protecting her inheritance with the same ruthlessness I'd just displayed, that my mother had gone into the study and found documents I hadn't known existed, papers that changed everything I thought I understood about my own past.
And that the biggest secret of all, the one that would explain why my father had really tried to make me give up Mira, why he'd been so desperate to erase her existence, that secret was waiting for me like a trap I'd walked right into, about to spring closed with consequences none of us could have anticipated. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about the money you take or the secrets you expose. Sometimes it's about the truths that have been hiding in plain sight all along, waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to finally look. And I was about to discover that the real story of my family had nothing to do with real estate empires or offshore accounts or who sat where at Christmas dinner. It had to do with blood and biology, and a lie so big that when it finally came out, it would tear apart everything the Castellanos had built over 3 generations. But that revelation was still 48 hours away, ticking like a bomb I didn't know I'd armed, waiting to detonate and reshape reality one more time. The letter arrived on a Friday, 2 days after Christmas, delivered by a private courier to my apartment at 10 in the morning. I almost didn't answer the door because Mira and I had been hiding, essentially, dodging calls, staying off social media, waiting to see what my family would do next. But something made me look through the peephole, and I saw a woman in a professional suit holding an envelope, her face neutral and patient. When I opened the door, she handed it to me without a word, waited for my signature, and left. The envelope was expensive, cream-colored with my name written in elegant script, no return address. I stood in my tiny kitchen, so different from my parents' showplace, with its linoleum floors and appliances from the previous decade, and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in my mother's handwriting. Patricia Castellano, who normally communicated through text messages or not at all, had actually written me a letter, and what it said changed absolutely everything. The letter started with an apology, which should have been my first clue that something was desperately wrong. My mother didn't apologize, not really, not in any meaningful way. She deflected and rationalized and made excuses, but she didn't actually admit fault. Yet here, in her distinctive looping cursive, she was saying she was sorry. Sorry for the years of silence. Sorry for enabling my father. Sorry for choosing money over family. But then, the letter took a turn I didn't see coming, and my hands started shaking so badly I had to sit down at my kitchen table to finish reading. There's something you need to know, something your father made me swear I'd never tell you, but after what happened at Christmas, after seeing what he did to Mira and realizing how far he's willing to go to maintain his secrets, I can't keep lying anymore. You deserve the truth, even if it destroys what's left of this family. Richard is not your biological father. Your real father was a man named James Chen, my piano teacher when I was 22. We had an affair. I got pregnant, and when I told Richard, the man I was engaged to, the man who'd already built his business and his reputation, he made me a deal. He would claim you as his, raise you as a Castellano, give you his name and his life, but only if I cut off all contact with James and never spoke of him again. He said one scandal could be contained, but if the truth came out, if people knew Richard Castellano's first daughter wasn't his blood, it would make him look weak, make him look like a man who couldn't control his own wife. And I was young and scared, and I wanted the life he promised me, so I agreed. James never even knew I was pregnant. I told him I was moving to California, and I never saw him again. I read the paragraph 3 times, 4 times.
The words didn't make sense, wouldn't settle into any kind of coherent meaning. My father, Richard, I had to start thinking of him as Richard now, wasn't my father. I was the product of an affair, a secret my mother had kept for 38 years. And suddenly, everything clicked into place with a clarity that was almost painful. Why Richard had always treated me differently from Derek and Vanessa. Why he'd been so obsessed with bloodlines and legitimate children. Why he'd demanded I give up Mira, not because she was born outside marriage, but because she represented the same kind of secret shame, the same evidence that the Castellano family wasn't the perfect dynasty he'd constructed for public consumption. The letter continued, my mother's handwriting getting messier as she wrote, like she was rushing to get the words out before she lost her courage. James Chen died 5 years ago. I found out through an obituary. He never married, never had other children, but he left behind a trust, Angelina. Everything he had, his house in Summerlin, his investments, his savings, he left it to any biological children who might exist, because apparently he always suspected something had happened that I'd left for a reason. The trust has been in probate, waiting for potential heirs to come forward, and nobody has, because nobody knew. But I know, and now you know, and if you want to claim what's rightfully yours, if you want to give Mira the inheritance she deserves from her actual grandfather, there's a lawyer named David Kim in Henderson. His number is at the bottom of this letter. He was James's executor. He's been waiting for someone to contact him. I sat there for 20 minutes just staring at the paper, my mind racing through implications and possibilities. Then I picked up my phone and called David Kim. The meeting was set for Monday morning at his office, a modest suite in a Green Valley building nowhere near the luxury high-rises where the Castellano lawyers worked. I didn't tell Mira where we were going, just that we had some business to take care of, and she came along clutching her backpack and a library book about ancient Egypt. David Kim turned out to be a kind-faced man in his 50s who looked at me with something like recognition when we walked in. "You look like him," he said simply. "James, you have his eyes, his smile. I was his lawyer for 20 years, and toward the end he used to talk about you sometimes, the daughter he never got to meet. He didn't have proof, understand, but he had this gut feeling that Patricia's sudden departure meant something more, and he made sure that if he was right, if you existed somewhere out there, you'd be taken care of." The trust was substantial, not billionaire money like Richard pretended to have, but real wealth built slowly over a lifetime, a paid-off house worth about $2 million, investment accounts totaling another $3 million, and a collection of rare pianos and Asian artwork that was valued at close to $500,000 more. James Chen had been a music professor at UNLV, a respected teacher and performer, a man who'd lived modestly but invested wisely, and he'd left everything to the child he suspected existed but never tried to find, respecting Patricia's decision to leave, but still hoping, somehow, that the truth would eventually come out. "There's one condition," David said, pulling out a file. James wanted any heir to understand his heritage. He created a scholarship fund at UNLV for music students, particularly those from Asian American backgrounds, and he wanted his heir to continue funding it. Not all the money, just a percentage, 10% of the trust value annually. He believed in education, in giving back, in making sure the next generation had opportunities he had to fight for. He looked at Mira, who was sitting quietly in her chair, swinging her legs. He would have loved to know he had a granddaughter. I found myself crying then, silent tears running down my face.
because this man I'd never met had shown more care for me and mine than Richard ever had. He'd left me money, yes, but more than that, he'd left me a legacy of kindness and purpose. He'd fought about the future, about how his wealth could make a difference beyond just giving his heir a comfortable life. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental. Family wasn't about blood or last names or who sat at which chair at dinner. It was about the people who showed up for you, who thought about your well-being even when you weren't in the room, who built something good and hoped you'd continue it. "I'll honor it," I said. "The scholarship fund, all of it. And I want to establish a second fund in my daughter's name for kids who are raised by single parents, kids who don't have traditional family support, because I know what that's like, and I know how much difference even a little help can make." David smiled. James would have approved. He pushed the paperwork across his desk. "All I need is a DNA test to confirm the biological connection, which is a formality at this point, and then the trust will be transferred to you within 90 days. In the meantime, because you're almost certainly the heir, I can arrange for immediate access to some funds if you need them." I shook my head. "We're okay. We've been okay for 15 years. We can wait 90 more days." But I took the papers and the knowledge that for the first time in my adult life, Mira and I would have security, real security, the kind that didn't depend on working 3 jobs or stretching every dollar or hoping nothing unexpected happened because we had no cushion to fall back on. The DNA test was done that afternoon, a simple cheek swab that would be analyzed and compared to samples David had from James' personal effects. We left his office and drove to UNLV, where I asked for directions to the music building. I don't know why I felt compelled to go there, but something pulled me, some need to see where James Chen had spent his professional life, to walk the halls he'd walked and imagine what kind of man he'd been. The building was beautiful, modern and filled with light, and through open doors I could hear piano music, violin scales, someone singing vocal exercises. A bulletin board in the main hallway displayed photos from recent performances, and there, in a frame designated for memorial tributes, I saw him, James Chen, my father, my real father. He had my eyes, or I had his, dark and slightly tilted, set in a face that was gentle and intelligent. The caption read, "Dr. James Chen, 1955 to 2019, beloved professor and mentor, whose generosity and wisdom touched countless lives." "Mommy, who's that?" Mira asked, following my gaze. I knelt down beside her, my hand on her shoulder. "That's your grandfather. Your real grandfather. He was a music professor, a good man, and he made sure that even though he never got to meet us, we'd be okay." She studied the photo seriously. "He looks nice." I think he was. I think he really was. We stayed there for a while, me and my daughter, looking at the picture of the man who'd given me life even if he never got to be part of it. And I thought about the strange paths that bring people together and tear them apart, about the secrets families keep and the lies they tell themselves, about how sometimes the people who should love you most are the ones who hurt you deepest, while strangers, or in this case an absent father who'd still somehow seen me, end up being the ones who save you.
But I also thought about Richard and what I'd done to him, the money I'd taken and the secrets I'd exposed. And I realized my revenge was only half complete, because yes, I'd hurt him financially, embarrassed him publicly, taken away some of his power, but I hadn't really made him understand, hadn't made him feel what I'd felt all those years, that bone-deep rejection and worthlessness. And now, with this new knowledge burning in my chest like swallowed fire, I knew exactly how to finish what I'd started.
I called my mother that night after Mira was in bed. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. "Did you meet with David?" she asked immediately. "I did, and thank you for telling me. I know it wasn't easy." She was quiet for a moment. "Your father, Richard, he doesn't know I told you. He thinks you left Christmas dinner because you were angry about Mira, because of what he said and did. He doesn't know about the letter." "Good," I said. "Keep it that way. I need to ask you something, Mom, and I need you to be honest. Did you ever love him, Richard? Or was it always about the lifestyle, the security, what he could give you?" Another pause, longer this time. "I loved the idea of him," she said finally. "The life he promised, the person I could be as his wife. But did I love him, the actual man? I don't know. Maybe at first. But people like Richard, they don't really let you love them. They're too busy being worshipped or feared, or both. There's no room for something as messy and real as actual love." "Then help me," I said. "Help me show him what it feels like to be on the outside looking in, to be rejected by the people who are supposed to love you no matter what, to be deemed not good enough for the family name. What do you want me to do?" "File for divorce. Take him for every penny you legally can. Use everything I gave you, all the evidence of fraud and hidden accounts, and burn him to the ground. Not because you hate him, but because you finally understand that he never saw you as a partner. You were a trophy, a prop in his perfect life story. And props don't get happy endings, Mom. They get replaced when they're no longer useful. Don't let that be you. Don't let him write the ending to your story." I heard her breathe, in and out, once, twice, then, "Vanessa will fight me. She'll protect him because she's exactly like him." "Let her try," I said. "Derek's too weak and too addicted to be useful to anyone, and you have leverage on him anyway, all those pharmacy records I mentioned. He'll side with whoever keeps him comfortable. And Vanessa? She's smart, but she's also practical. When she sees you have all the evidence, when she realizes fighting you means exposing everything and losing it all, she'll make the practical choice. She'll sacrifice Richard to save herself. That's what people like her do." "And what about you? What do you get out of this?" "Peace," I said simply.
The knowledge that he finally understands what it's like to lose everything, and the ability to move forward with Mira, to build something real from what James left us, without constantly looking over my shoulder waiting for Richard to destroy us. My mother filed for divorce 3 days later. The legal papers were delivered to Richard at his office by a courier, along with a flash drive containing copies of every piece of evidence I'd collected over the years. Evidence of tax fraud, money laundering, falsified construction bids, bribery of city officials, everything. The accompanying letter, written by a lawyer my mother had hired from a firm in Los Angeles with no Vegas connections, was beautifully brutal. It laid out grounds for divorce, including infidelity with Stephanie and at least 4 other women, financial malfeasance, and a pattern of emotional abuse. It demanded 50% of all marital assets, including his share of the Castellano Development Corporation, the house in Summerlin, the vacation property in Lake Tahoe, and various investment accounts. And it made clear that if Richard contested anything, if he tried to hide assets or drag out proceedings, everything on that flash drive would be turned over to federal authorities. I heard about his reactions secondhand through my mother, who'd moved into the Waldorf Astoria penthouse using his credit card and seemed to be enjoying her newfound independence. Apparently, he'd thrown his phone across his office, putting a crack in the $40,000 abstract painting he'd commissioned from some trendy New York artist. He'd called her screaming, threatening, trying to intimidate her into backing down. But Patricia Castellano, after 36 years of marriage, had finally grown a spine. She told him to have his lawyers contact her lawyers, and hung up.
Then she blocked his number and went to a spa. Vanessa, as I'd predicted, was the wild card. She came to see me 2 weeks into the divorce proceedings, showing up at my apartment without warning or invitation. I let her in because I was curious what she'd say, how she'd try to spin this. "You're destroying everything," she said without preamble, pacing my small living room like a caged animal. "The business, the family name, Dad's reputation. You're tearing it all apart out of spite because he hurt your feelings." "He didn't hurt my feelings," I corrected calmly. "He pushed my 9-year-old daughter on the floor and told her she wasn't good enough to be part of this family. There's a difference. It was one incident, one mistake, and you're using it to—" It was 15 years of incidents, 15 years of him treating me and Mira like we didn't exist, like we were shameful secrets instead of human beings. And it wasn't about hurt feelings, Vanessa. It was about showing him that actions have consequences, that you can't just use people and discard them when they're inconvenient. She stopped pacing, turned to face me. "So what, you team up with Mom to take everything? You become just like him, vindictive and cruel and willing to destroy anyone who gets in your way." "I'm nothing like him," I said quietly, "because when this is over, when your father has lost his money and his power and his precious reputation, I'm going to rebuild. I'm going to take what James Chen left me and use it to help people, to create scholarships and fund shelters and support single parents who are struggling the way I struggled. Richard destroys. I'm going to build. That's the difference." Vanessa stared at me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she sat down on my second-hand couch. "James Chen was your biological father." It wasn't a question. "Mom told you." She told me everything, about the affair, about Richard knowing from the beginning that you weren't his, about him raising you anyway because it would look worse to admit the truth. And suddenly, everything makes sense. Why he always treated you different, why he was so obsessed with legitimate bloodlines, why he went nuclear when you got pregnant. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. He wasn't protecting the family reputation. He was protecting his ego. The great Richard Castellano, who couldn't even keep his fiancée faithful. "So what are you going to do?" I asked. "Fight for him anyway? Protect the father who's apparently been lying to all of us your entire life?" She was quiet for a long time, her manicured fingers drumming against her knee. Finally, she said, "Mom offered me a deal. If I testify about some of the financial irregularities I've witnessed over the years, things I saw working in the company that I ignored because it benefited me, she'll ensure I keep my position in the business and my trust fund stays intact. If I side with Dad, I risk everything when the federal investigation starts. And I'm not an idiot, Angelina. I'm angry at you for blowing up our lives, and I hate that you're probably right about most of it, but I'm not going to go down with him. Derek already folded. Mom threatened to expose his DUI and his drug problem to Lauren's family, and he caved within 24 hours. So it'll be me and Mom on one side, Dad alone on the other. He's going to lose. Everything." "Good," I said simply. Vanessa looked at me with something that might have been respect or might have been resentment, I couldn't tell. "You're stronger than I thought, smarter too. I always dismissed you as the family screw-up, but you played all of us." "I didn't play anyone," I said. "I just paid attention. I learned, and when the time was right, I acted. That's not manipulation, Vanessa, that's survival." She stood up, smoothed her designer dress. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about Mira, about Christmas. She didn't deserve that. Neither did you, really." "No," I agreed. "We didn't." After she left, I sat in my apartment and felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but a sense of rightness, of justice being served, even if it was messy and imperfect and complicated. Because the truth is, revenge is never clean. It doesn't wrap up neatly with villains punished and heroes vindicated. Real life is more complicated than that.
But sometimes, when you've been hurt deeply enough, when you've been rejected and abandoned and told you don't matter, sometimes striking back isn't about being vindictive, it's about reclaiming your power, showing yourself and the world that you have value, that you won't be erased, that you refuse to quietly disappear just because someone wishes you would. The divorce took 6 months to finalize. Richard fought every step of the way, but he was fighting a losing battle. The evidence was overwhelming, and his own lawyer eventually advised him to settle rather than risk federal prosecution. He ended up losing the house, most of his liquid assets, his majority share in the company, and his reputation.
The Vegas business community, which had treated him like royalty for decades, turned on him fast once word got out about the fraud. Suddenly, nobody wanted the Castellano name attached to their projects. Permits got mysteriously delayed, investors pulled out. The empire he'd built over 40 years crumbled in less than one. My mother, surprisingly, blossomed in the aftermath. She moved into a beautiful condo downtown, started actually running the charitable foundation properly, and began dating a retired judge who treated her with genuine respect. She called me once a month, never pushing for more, but always asking about Mira, always interested in our lives. It wasn't enough to erase 15 years of absence, but it was something, a start. Derek went to rehab, got clean, and moved to Oregon with Lauren to start over somewhere away from the wreckage. Vanessa took over the company, rebranded it, and actually made it more successful by focusing on ethical practices and transparency. She sent Mira a birthday present, a college savings bond, with a card that said, "Family is complicated, but you deserve better than what we gave you. Hope this helps." And me? I used James Chen's inheritance exactly how I'd promised. I established the scholarship funds, donated to the women's shelter, set up Mira's education trust, and bought us a modest house in Henderson. Nothing fancy, but ours, really ours, with a yard and a dog and enough space for Mira to have friends over without being embarrassed about where we lived. I went back to school, finished my MBA, and started a consulting business helping small companies with sustainable development practices. Turned out all those years watching Richard cut corners and exploit systems had taught me exactly what not to do, and businesses were willing to pay good money for that knowledge. On Mira's 10th birthday, 6 months after everything ended, we held a small party in our backyard. Her friends from school came, along with David Kim and his family, my mother and her boyfriend, and even Vanessa showed up with an expensive gift and an awkward but genuine smile. We sang happy birthday, ate cake, and I watched my daughter blow out her candles surrounded by people who actually cared about her, who saw her as a person rather than an inconvenience. Later that night, after everyone left and Mira was in bed, I sat on my back porch looking at the stars. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello?
It's Richard. His voice was different, smaller, older. I'm calling to say... I don't know why I'm calling, actually. Maybe to say you won. You destroyed me, took everything. Are you satisfied? I thought about that question. About satisfaction and justice and whether revenge ever really gives you what you're looking for. I'm not satisfied, I said honestly, but I'm at peace. There's a difference. You spent 15 years teaching me that I didn't matter, that Mira didn't matter, that we were mistakes to be hidden away and forgotten. But we mattered to James Chen, a man I never met who still made sure we'd be okay. We mattered to the women at the shelter who were getting a second chance because of his generosity. We mattered to the students getting scholarships in his name. And most importantly, we mattered to each other. So no, I'm not satisfied, but I'm done letting you define my worth. That's all I needed. He was quiet for a long time. Then, for what it's worth, I do regret... Don't, I interrupted. Don't call to apologize or explain or make yourself feel better. You made your choices. You lived your life exactly how you wanted. You just never thought there would be consequences that you couldn't buy or intimidate your way out of. But there were. And now we both get to live with that. Goodbye, Richard. I hung up before he could respond, blocked the number, and went inside to check on my daughter. She was sleeping peacefully, her new books stacked beside her bed, a smile on her face even in dreams. And I realized something profound. I hadn't just won. I had freed us from the weight of trying to belong to a family that didn't want us, from the exhausting work of proving we deserved love, from the desperate hope that someday, somehow, they'd see us as worthy. We didn't need them. We'd never needed them. We just needed to believe in ourselves enough to walk away and build something better. And that's exactly what we'd done. Not through violence or cruelty, but through truth and justice and the courage to stand up and say enough is enough. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's showing them that you don't need them at all, that you can take their rejection and their cruelty and their absolute worst and still build a life that's beautiful and meaningful and full of love. That's what Mira and I did, and that, in the end, was worth more than any amount of money or status or belonging to the Castellano name could ever be. We were free, and freedom, it turns out, is the sweetest revenge of all. Before you head out, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read them all. I truly appreciate you spending time with me today. Another story is on the way very soon. Until next time, stay positive, stay brave, and keep believing in yourself.